Hello, and welcome to this session on Open Access Books Analytics. The first part of the session will be presented by me, Niels Stern, and the second part will be presented by colleagues from Columbia University Library. I represent the OAPEN Foundation, which is an infrastructure enabling open access to scholarly books. Our mission is to increase the discoverability of open access books and to promote and build trust in OA book publishing. OAPEN is an international foundation based in the Netherlands, and we cannot be sold or acquired. This is part of our statutes. Our services are the OAPEN Library, which is a hosting platform, distribution, and preservation for 25,000 plus peer-reviewed open access books from many publishers. Together with Open Edition in France, we also operate the Directory of Open Access Books, which is a global indexing service of over 60,000 peer-reviewed OA books from more than 600 publishers. We also coordinate and manage the OA Books Toolkit, which is a helpful public information resource on topics related to OA book publishing. So the OAPEN Library, as mentioned, is a hosting, distribution, and preservation platform for OA books. It was launched in 2010, and it has been growing steadily over the years. It is based on open source DSpace 6, and therefore it's easy to integrate into library information systems. We also provide output in different metadata formats and an open API. The usage of the OAPEN library has been growing significantly over the years, and we now see around 1 million counter-conformant downloads per month from the OAPEN library. The Directory of Open Access Books is also running on DSpace 6, providing the same possibilities for libraries to engage with the directory, for instance, through activation in the knowledge base of Ex Libris ELMA or EBSCO knowledge base or the OCLC knowledge base. The directory was launched in 2013 and has been attracting publishers from many places around the globe. This is how the infrastructure looks behind the scenes. So you can see on the left that we work with publishers in many different ways. They provide us with metadata and a variety of formats and flavors of ONIX and other formats that we get either through basic emailing from FTP uploads or by us harvesting publishers or intermediaries like BiblioVault or CoreSource. Then we get the metadata and the titles into the OAPEN library. We then normalize it and we push it downstream to web services like Google Scholar, Internet Archive, on Paywall and other services, but also to the library intermediaries like OCLC, Ex Libris, and EBSCO. And we know that libraries tend to engage a lot with the content. We have did a calculation that more than 1,200 libraries are directly interacting with content on the OAPEN platform or the Directory of Open Access Books. As mentioned, also the OA Books Toolkit, which is a helpful resource to libraries and research support staff who want to learn more about OA book publishing from a researcher point of view. Now, the OAPEN statistics, we have provided counter-conformant download statistics to publishers and research funders since 2015. This year, we have created a new visualization, a dashboard of the statistics, and we also now provide this dashboard to those libraries who are our library supporters as a benefit. The way in which the data is shown is in the form of this schema. So you can filter by, for instance, date or publisher. You can download all the statistics as a CSV file. And this statistics is based on the IP ranges that you provide to us. You can also see it visualized. Here you can see the number of those titles that have been downloaded the most. And you can also, instead of seeing books that have been used through the within the IP ranges, you can also see them based on geolocation. And here's one example where the geolocation that has been set to 20 kilometers and another one to 250 kilometers. So depending on the region, you can see how's the usage outside of the campus, because of course, open access books don't have to be accessed via the authentication systems. So they could be accessed remotely, and that can give you a more complete view of the usage from around the university campus. Here's another example of 500 kilometers away from the University of Michigan library. And we have a short video on YouTube where we go through step by step the different options in the dashboard. So next to that, we also have a new collaboration on OA Books usage dashboards. And this is a project which is called the Book Analytics Dashboard Project. And this is running for 3 years. It began in April this year and will run until 2025, together with Educopia in the US and Curtin University in Australia. The project's formal title is the OA Book Usage Analytics for Diverse Communities. And it comes from another project, also funded by the Mellon Foundation, which was called the OAEBU Data Trust Project. The focus is on creating a sustainable OA book-focused analytics service, and our goal is creating this service to help safeguard and support diversity in the voices, perspectives, geographies, topics, and languages made visible through OA books. As mentioned, we provide this as an aggregated view. So whereas the OAPEN library dashboard is providing the usage going through the OAPEN platform, this dashboard will aggregate usage from not only the OAPEN platform, but also from other platforms like Google Books, like JSTOR, and other platforms that we will add to the service. So also as a library, you will be able to see an aggregated usage from multiple resources. Also, the dashboard will provide information about mentions on Wikipedia, on Twitter, and other social media platforms using Crossref data. You can also see usage by geography, by subject, by institution, and you can imagine more. And we would be very happy to learn about what you think could be relevant. Because our question really is, what kind of OA book metrics do libraries want? And maybe you want specific metrics that makes you capable of taking informed decisions about OA book publishers and services that you might want to support, that you might want to financially contribute to. And with this kind of data that I have just presented, you get quantitative data, but maybe you also want qualitative data. So that is something we would be interested in hearing back from you. And here I want to mention the notion of the rubric, because my colleagues from Columbia University Library will go more into details about this. And maybe The quantitative data and the qualitative data should not only be for OA book publishing, but should be for any book publishing initiative, which is something we'd also like to hear your opinion about. So we invite libraries to engage in this discussion, either through the Q&A here after the session, but also through project workshops and surveys that we will bring out as part of the project that I just presented. Furthermore, the OAPEN Foundation and the Directory of Open Access Books have working groups that look into issues that are relevant to libraries, and this is something also to consider to take part in. And finally, we're always welcoming feedback to our address info@oapen.org if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share. So with this, I will give the floor to my colleagues at Columbia University Library.
Hi, I'm Leah Dunn. I'm Director of Collection Strategies at Columbia University Libraries. I'm going to introduce Columbia's portion of this presentation on developing a rubric for open access evaluation. Then I'll turn it over to my colleagues Esther Jackson, Catherine Brooks, and Jeremiah Mercurio to further lead us through this topic. Prior to 2020, a task force for open access was created for Columbia University Libraries. Its charge was to review the current commitment to open at Columbia and make recommendations for processes and practices that would establish the university as a leading open knowledge institution. It was to assess and publicly advocate for open initiatives, create and publish guidelines for selectors and others with budgetary control over investments in software or initiatives pertaining to open, and ensure Columbia had representation when open issues were being discussed. Its early work focused on developing a framework for assessing investment in open access. The group looked at other models and examples of work that identified elements of a sustainable model for open access publications. These elements were values-based and included potential for transformative influence, engagement with the scholarly community, economic stability, operational concerns of long-term viability and sustainability, disclosure and transparency of the open access organization, and protection from financial risk for the university. Then came 2020, and the work of the Open Access Task Force paused to focus on more pressing matters. But by 2021, a new day had dawned, and the task force was able to reconvene and renew its work on open access. In the time that passed, we were seeing a changing landscape in the open access arena. A rapid evolution of open access on the part of publishers, which involves moving from an APC model funded by faculty to a transformative model that moves the cost center to libraries, and a proliferation of transformative agreements, read and publish deals, and most recently the OSTP memorandum on access to federally funded research. We had an immediate need to pivot and respond to these new developments. The need rose to shift focus to the evaluation of the many offers, which meant a shift of framework of values to a means of applying those values to publisher offers. This led to the consideration of a rubric. The rubric was designed with open access journals in mind, but with the increase of other types of open access offerings like books, we're hoping it can be applied to other open access publications as well. I will now turn it over to my colleagues involved with the drafting and the testing of the rubric. One area of later discussion could be on how the elements of the rubric of measuring impact could be aided by the work of OA Open, and how other elements of bridging quantitative and qualitative measures can be achieved. Thank you.
So once we had our plan of what we were trying to do, we reached out to our colleagues who we thought might have been doing similar work. So we reached out to 3 listservs And our solicitation email basically summarized what we were hoping to accomplish, which was a tool that would help individual selectors as well as collection development committees evaluate and compare OA offers. And at the time that we sent the email, we were planning to evaluate offers in terms of accessibility, authors' rights, EDI, cost ratings, and we left things open and more. So we had a lot of responses, which was absolutely fantastic. We heard from people who had already done work in this area, as well as from people who were interested in the types of work that we would do in terms of our rubric. We received a mix of responses, and so here's a summary of the universities who we heard back from. And we received both externally facing documents as well as internal rubrics that were in different states of draft. So some people sent us things that were very much in progress, whereas other people sent us things that were more refined and were being used in their selection processes. So in addition to hearing from universities, we also heard from different organizations, both directly, and we also were recommended different materials that other organizations had already created to do this kind of assessment work. SPARC also reached out to us directly in order to advise us and to learn more about our project scope, which was very nice. They set up a meeting. If you're interested in learning about the resources that we gathered, we put together a public Zotero group library, which you can access at either of these links here. And if you want to reach out to us directly, you can do so to find out our contacts who sent us internal materials as well. So the public group library has all of the publicly available resources in it.
After reviewing the open access assessment tools that we collected from other institutions, we decided to adapt the UC Berkeley assessment rubric for our own use. The Berkeley rubric had 21 criteria divided into 3 themes. The first theme is impact. The impact theme evaluates the accessibility, diversity and inclusion, and global impact of an OA resource. Each criterion receives a certain number of points, and then all points from all criterion are summed to get a total points for each OA resource that you can then compare to other OA resources that you've scored using the rubric. At Columbia, we decided to weight each criterion. For instance, each criterion could receive from 1 to 4 points, corresponding to whether we ranked its importance to us as being low, medium, high, or very high. Users of the rubric would then use the drop-down menu in the Is the Criterion Met column to choose yes, no, or not applicable. If a criterion was met and you choose yes, then the points awarded is updated to reflect the total possible points. For instance, for this criterion, a yes would garner 3 points awarded out of 3 possible points. If the criterion was not met and the user chose no, then 0 points would be awarded out of 3 possible points. If the criterion was not applicable, or NA, then 0 points would be awarded out of 0 possible points. In this way, criterion that were not applicable to this particular resource that was being evaluated would not be counted against that resource in the total possible points. The second theme in this rubric is sustainability and governance. And this is really evaluating aspects of the vendor's business model. For instance, is the resource coming from a not-for-profit? Or does the resource facilitate global openness of an important project or initiative? Finally, the third theme is looking inward and is Columbia University focused. It's really evaluating how the OA offer will specifically impact the Columbia University community as opposed to the global community. For example, does the resource support Columbia University's mission and the library's strategic directions? Secondly, is payment for the resource financially sustainable for Columbia? More specifically, does the cost to transition to an open access business model for this resource constitute a huge price increase, or is it cost neutral or a low increase? Secondly, are the annual increases for this OA model reasonable and fairly predictable? After using this rubric and testing it with a number of open access resource offers, we determined that it was too long and it was unreasonable for us to ask our selectors or other individuals using the rubric to complete the entire thing. We then decided to eliminate criteria from the rubric that either required reaching out again to vendors or publishers to ask specific questions or doing any kind of online research on our own. We also eliminated criteria that we felt applied to all resources that might be offered to Columbia University libraries and not just to open access specific resources. 6 criteria were retained in this second version of the open access rubric. We included whether the resource supports global open access to audiences outside of Columbia, whether authors retain copyright over their work, whether the resource commits to content, data, software under open licenses, whether the resource will reduce financial barriers for Columbia University authors, and also reduce publication costs for all authors, not just authors at Columbia or other paying institutions. Finally, we asked whether payment for the resource is financially sustainable. So the OA Pen Books Analytics Dashboard is still under development, and because of this, it could also provide other metrics beyond aggregated usage data that could be useful to institutions like ours or like yours as we evaluate open access offers. To do this, though, these qualitative criteria that we listed in our open access assessment rubric would need to be converted to quantitative criteria. How might we do this? We'd love to hear your opinions on this. How can we find quantitative criteria that publishers could provide as metadata to then support OA acquisition decisions on the OA Pen Books Analytics Dashboard? Thank you.